Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 19th, 2024 Public Services Committee. Little housekeeping, if you're going to speak, please approach podium, turn the mic on and identify yourself. Cell phones, things like that, cell phones, pads, if you could either mute them or turn them off. And since we have a long agenda today, we're probably going to limit comments and questions to 3 minutes each. So at this point, clerk, first item.
Number 9, ordinance second reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, tracts of land situate in portions of sections 4 and 5, township 13 north, range 67 west of the 6 PM, Laramie County, Wyoming, also known as North Range Business Park, located northwest of the I-80 and Round Top Road interchange.
Okay, we have staff report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. This annexation proposes annexing North Range Business Park, which has had access to BOPU water and sewer for quite some time under outside user agreement and became eligible for annexation earlier this year with an annexation to the south. The annexation is not contiguous to city limits, but is adjacent pursuant to Wyoming state statute by jumping the I-80 right-of-way. We are allowed to do that according to state statute. If I-80 right-of-way didn't exist, the property would be about 19% contiguous with city limits. This is a city-initiated annexation, and there was a resolution passed initiating that annexation. So now we're on the ordinance stage, which would make the annexation official. I'm available for any questions on this item.
Okay, any questions from committee?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
real quick. The people that own property in this business park, they've been aware that when this becomes eligible for annexation, that it would be annexed. Is that your understanding?
Mr. Chair, when we started the process back in the spring, we had the Leeds, who is the kind of property group coordinator, contacted those agencies and said it was coming. Some agencies weren't aware it was in their original agreement, but then it was pointed out to them. And so they were aware. I think all agencies were aware prior to the annexation resolution passing.
Okay, any further questions or comments from committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rennie.
So I think Mr. Lloyd just maybe touched on that, but to follow up with Mr. Seagrave's comment, if they're all having outside users agreement with Board of Public Utilities, and that was in their agreements that they signed, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then I just had one, it's kind of a random question, but what's the fire service response time out there? Is the nearest station coming from the one by McCormick?
Mr. Chair, I do not have an answer to that question. I'd have to defer to if we have a member of the fire
There's the
department here.
expert.
Here we have it.
Yeah,
Saw you back there with incognito.
get a few steps in this guy.
Mr. Chair, John Copper, Fire Chief, Cheyenne Fire Rescue. Near the closest station as we sit today, when we annex this, will be headquarters.
Okay.
So.
That makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief.
Any further questions from committee? Okay, hearing none. Any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve on second.
Second.
So a motion is second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Next item.
Number 10, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of LI light industrial and BP business park for tracts of land being annexed to the city situate in portions of sections 4 and 5, township 13 north, range 67 west of the 6 PM, Laramie County, Wyoming, also known as North Range Business Park, located northwest of the I-80 and Round Top Road interchange.
Staff report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. This is the assigned zoning for the annexation. It was the previous item on the agenda. The BP zone was recently created with this business park in mind, specifically a desire for a large mix of industrial and commercial uses. Due to proximity to the freeway and other major transportation routes, it was determined that that would be an acceptable format. And so we've created that BP zone district. So most of the business park is going to BP. There are a couple of parcels in the area that are also currently zoned LI in the county. So that'll be coming to city LI. And I will note that there is one parcel in that area, annexation area that is currently zoned A2 in the county. And we missed the legal notice on that, so it will be zoned AG in an upcoming set of meetings. It shouldn't be a problem to have that temporarily unzoned. It's also completely Black Hills Energy parcel, so it's just a substation. I don't anticipate any development action being proposed in the month interim between the two items. The planning commission did hear this assigned zoning at their planning commission meeting and felt like the assigned zones were appropriate, and I'm available for any questions on this item.
Any questions from committee? Any questions? Okay, any public comment?
Good morning, everybody. This is Dante, Rushton with Cheyenne Leads. We just want to thank city staff for their help getting the BP ordinance passed, as well as the council for adopting that last month. And we've had feedback from our users in the business parks and then Leads members. They all really enjoy what they see in the ordinance, and we look forward to adopting it throughout the city and our business parks. So just a big thank you to staff and the council for that.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Public comment. Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any committee, any questions to committee? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Number 11, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from AG agricultural and HI heavy industrial to AG agricultural for land located south of Council Road and north of Interstate 80.
Staff report.
Chair, members of the committee, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The zone change before you, it's just to basically make one parcel completely AG. There's a platting action that is currently in our office. It's been approved, but it's to subdivide the parcel to create a few lots off of Campstool Road. And by doing this, a portion of the AG parcel that currently exists is going to have an HI component to it. So the zone change is basically just to make that all AG and take out that HI so we don't have split zoning with this platting action. This AG parcel is mostly a drainage area. That's why it's zoned AG. Planning Commission did hear this item and recommended approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Hearing none, any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion? So a motion is second. Any questions or comments from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Number 12, ordinance second reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, various tracts of land completely surrounded by current city limits, Situate and Northeast Cheyenne, generally located north of Bevan Street, west of College Drive, and south of Del Range Boulevard.
Okay, staff reports.
Chair and members of the committee, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The annexation before you is for 38 parcels in the northeastern part of Cheyenne, north of Bevan, south of Del Range, and west of College. These parcels are part of the County Pocket Annexation Initiative, part of council's goals. These are all 100% surrounded by city limits. There was a public hearing for this annexation last Monday. There was no public comment. Staff does recommend approval of this annexation, and I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Any public comment? Public comment? Okay, may I have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
So I have a motion is second. Any comments or questions from committee? Go ahead.
Hallelujah.
Okay. Any other further comments or questions from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay, next item.
Number 13, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification at MR, medium density residential, HR, high density residential, and CB, community business for land annexed to the city of Cheyenne, generally located north of Bevan Street, west of College Drive, and south of Del Range Boulevard.
Okay, staff report, please.
Chair, members of the committee, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. This assigned zoning goes along with the previous item for the annexation. So when we bring these parcels into city limits, they do need a city zone. I'll go quickly through what these assigned zones are because we do have a couple different zone districts within this pocket. Most of them are going to be MR, medium density residential. There is a planned unit development that is in this area. So staff had to look at this planned unit development, see what uses are allowed, and then kind of come up with what would be the closest city zone for this parcel. Staff, after reviewing the PUD, came up with the CB Community Business Zone. The one allowed use for this parcel and the only allowed use in the PUD for this parcel is an automobile repair shop. So the closest zone district really that permits that and would allow the use to continue as a permitted use would be our CB zone. So that's how staff determined that CB zone. There is a large parcel in this area that is zoned HR, so high density residential. So that is going to come in as high density residential into city limits. This can be developed with multifamily, could be subdivided into townhomes or duplexes, single family, things like that. The rest of the parcels, besides those two that I'd mentioned, they're all zoned MR, so they'll all be brought into the city limits as medium density residential. Planning Commission did hear this item at their meeting and did recommend approval of this assigned zoning. I'm available for any questions.
Okay, any questions from staff or from council or committee? Any questions? Okay, any public comment? Public comment. Hearing none, may I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from committee? Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Number 14, ordinance, second reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, various tracts of land completely surrounded by a current city limit situate in northeast Cheyenne, generally located east of Ridge Road, west of Whitney Road, and along Dell Range Boulevard.
Staff report.
Again, Conner White Planning and Development Department. This annexation before you, it's also a county pocket annexation. So all of these parcels are 100% surrounded by city limits. There are 26 parcels within this pocket. Again, there was a public hearing on this annexation. There was no public comment. Staff does recommend approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Hearing none, any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Number 15, ordinance, second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of AR, agricultural residential, LR, low density residential, MR, medium density residential, and MUR, mixed use residential for land annexed to the city of Cheyenne, generally located east of Ridge Road, west of Whitney Road, and along Dell Range Boulevard.
Staff report.
Again, Conner White Planning and Development Department. This assigned zoning goes with the last item on the agenda. Again, I'll run through kind of what these zones are real quick, because there are a few different zones again in this pocket. So we've got the MR, medium density residential. There is a lot that has half of it being MR, half of it being mixed use in the county. So it will be split zoning when it comes into city limits, as our assigned zoning is just bringing forward what that underlying zone is. The south half of this lot is zone mixed use, so that's going to come in as mixed use residential into city limits, and that back half will be medium density residential. There are a lot of pockets or a lot of parcels in this annexation that are zoned AR, so agricultural residential. And then we do have a pocket that is low density residential as well in this area on the south half. It's the only pocket on the southern side of Dell Range. Planning Commission did hear this sign zoning at their meeting and recommended approval. And I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Any public comment? Public comment? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion? So I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Number 16, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from P public and MUR mixed use residential to MUB mixed use business for land located northeast of the intersection of Maury Avenue and East Lincoln Way.
Staff report.
Again, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. So this is a zone change for basically the southwest portion of Holiday Park. So what we have is an actual parcel down there that is kind of built into Holiday Park with a residence on it that is privately owned. The city does have a contract with the applicant to sell off the parking lot portion. So the applicant is looking to basically turn this into one zone district, so that when it gets platted, it has that one zone district so it can be redeveloped. The current zoning on this parcel, it's MUR, mixed use residential, and then the portion that is part of the park is zone P public. The applicant is requesting mixed use business for the zoning. The applicant is also requesting the UU overlay. Currently on the future land use map, it is open space and parks on our future land use designation. But the next item on the agenda is to change that designation so that it lines up with what this proposed zone change is requesting. So the applicant is requesting mixed use business with the UU overlay. Staff, when we reviewed the request, we do believe that the mixed use business does work for this parcel. When you look at this portion of East Lincoln Way, a lot of the buildings are brought closer to the street. You have more of that frontage along the street with windows, which is more what our mixed use business kind of requires. So we do feel that the mixed use business zone district does fit this area very well, even though when you look at the map, there is no mixed use business in the area. There have been discussions in our office of looking at the zoning for this entire corridor and even looking at a 15th Street plan. None of that has gone anywhere. It's all been just internal discussions, kind of looking at this area of our downtown, or I guess the east side of our downtown. So we do feel mixed use business fits the area. When we looked at the UU, staff felt that the only criteria it didn't meet was number 2 of the zoning criteria. And that is just due to there's no UU in the area. We don't have a plan specifically approved for this area. The applicant is requesting the UU. I know we've had a lot of discussions on the UU lately, and I will let the applicant kind of go over what they're proposing here, but the applicant has told us that they're requesting the UU more for the setback reduction and the height allowance. They are planning to provide parking, so parking is not the concern on this proposed project. It is that they are looking at reduction for setbacks when it comes to the side and the rear. And then in the UU, there isn't a height requirement. And their proposal is a 6-story building that has residential above commercial, basically. So a mixed use building. If this only has the mixed use business zone district designation, they would only be allowed up to 3 stories and then would have to get a conditional use to go over 3 stories. So they would have to go to the Board of Adjustment to get that, rather than just having the UU and being allowed to go up to 6. And then their setbacks, they would have, I believe it's a 5 on the side and if I'm remembering correctly, a 15-foot rear setback. So that's why they're requesting the UU. Again, when staff went to Planning Commission, we recommended just the MUB. Planning Commission did end up recommending to council just the MUB zone. There have been discussions with Planning Commission where it was almost tied on recommending it with the UU versus recommending without. So with that, Planning Commission's recommendation is to approve the zone change with just the mixed use business zone. And I'm available for any questions.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
through you, I would like to talk about the ownership issue first. I have a couple of questions. Have you seen this purchase agreement?
That was, Mr. Chair, through you, yes.
And when was that
Ooh,
created? My understanding is several years old.
Mr. Chair, through you, that is correct. It is several years old. I believe 4 years old.
So do we need a new appraisal? I'm not used to non-owners coming in and petitioning to change zoning on public owned land. And I don't think the council has ever heard this for sale issue. I'm not sure we want to sell parkland is what I'm getting around to.
Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. In 2019, there was a resolution that was passed declaring this piece of property surplus. And then once it was declared surplus, there is a advertisement put out for bids. Mr. Swain was the winning bidder on the property. At that time, there was an appraisal that was complete. He had intended to immediately start moving forward with the plating of the property, the zoning of the property, and the land use change for the property, everything that you see in front of you here today. The reason this was delayed was mostly was definitely because of a land and water conservation district restriction that we were not aware was on the parking lot area. It was determined that that had accidentally been applied to the parking lot when modifications were made to remove the YMCA property from that land and water conservation district area back in the early 2000s. So we ended up having to go through a process with the State Parks Department and the National Park Service to correct the map. Essentially, it was a correction. It wasn't what Miss Anderson Trednick has gone through with the recent transfer of restriction. This was a correction of the map that took several years to get corrected, and we finally had it resolved in the middle of next year. During that time, the purchase agreement has been extended. It has the ability to be extended by agreement between the parties, and it has been extended, and it presently is extended through, I believe it's March or February 15th of 2025. In discussions with this, we had also looked at, to just the appraisal question, we had looked at whether a new appraisal would be appropriate for this area. And staff has decided that, you know, this is a circumstance based on the delay because of the land and water conservation restrictions that was unforeseen, that we do not believe a new appraisal is appropriate because the delay was unanticipated. And it would have closed earlier if it hadn't had that delay. And additionally, the property values, we do not believe have changed that much in the area to warrant a new appraisal.
Mr. Seagrave?
Surplusing the land was before my time. I probably would not have supported that. I think parkland is parkland. If today's use is a parking lot, tomorrow, who knows what they could use it for. But if that's what's happened, I guess I don't have any option.
Dr. Rennie?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to review the history, which I just got.
Okay. And I have a quick question. How did we end up with a house in Holiday Park?
Ms. Chair, through you, that is a very good question. Staff is not 100% certain how we ended up with a privately owned lot with a single family home built into the park. I would like to also note that there is a plat that would be coming forward for all of Holiday Park, which would vacate streets and lots that are still actually going through Holiday Park. Holiday Park as it sits, there are technically any of the streets that you see, if I go to kind of the screen, any of those east-west streets on the far west side that would look like they would go right through the park actually do and continue. They were never vacated. There's technically single platted lots all the way through Holiday Park. So there is a plat that would clean all that up. But that would be coming within the next month.
Good. Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Mr.
um, as was noted earlier, this UU designation has been receiving attention lately, and it is something that I think is real important. I don't see in the ordinance before us any notation of the UU. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, through you, so in the current ordinance before you, that is Planning Commission's recommendation without the UU. Should council decide to add the UU back into the ordinance because you would like to approve it with the MUB and UU, if you find that that's suitable for what the developer is looking to do and what benefits that they can use from that UU to allow them to develop it, you can add that back in. I actually do have a substitute already prepared in case that does happen, because I wasn't sure what way Planning Commission was gonna go, so I do have an ordinance ready with the UU built into it. But because Planning Commission only recommended approval with the MUB zone, that is the current ordinance in front of you. So we would have to make an amendment to add the UU back in.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
how many living units are we talking about? I think I read around 40. Does that sound right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, it would be around 40 living units, and then again, the ground floor would be commercial.
How are, assuming there's 2 cars per unit besides the commercial business, that's 80 cars on this property. Is that gonna work under just the one designation, the one zoning?
Mr. Chair, through you,
Without the UU?
so without the UU, the applicant would have to find how to meet the parking requirements with the MUB zone. Again, with the UU, yes, there is no minimum parking. They have stated they're planning to provide parking. I will let our applicant kind of discuss that whole portion of it. But when it comes to multifamily, it's one space per 1 bedroom or studio apartment. And then it would be 1.5 spaces per 2 bedroom or anything greater. So depending on the mix of unit types they have and how they decide to design the site, there could be the potential that they could get up to the correct number of spaces needed. They can use parking credits already, even with if they zoned to MUB without the UU. We do get parking credits for bicycle parking, or if there's a transit stop, you can get a slight reduction in your parking. So depending on how they're utilizing that too, there is a way that they could find to get the correct amount of parking on the site. And if they can't get the correct amount of parking, maybe they have to reduce the number of units.
And how many parking requirements for the business portion of this?
Businesses are it's going to be determined on what business it is and the size. If you give me 1 second, I could kind of pull up.
Just a ballpark.
It sounds like our applicant might be able to speak to that. They might have the numbers off the top of their head. I just know when it comes to restaurants, I think it's 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, something like that. And then you need, I think it's 1 space per 2 employees on maximum shift or something similar to that. And then offices are 1 space per 300, I believe. So it varies based on the business on how much parking is going to be required for that business.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, hearing none, public comment.
Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Brandon Swain, 2856 Boulevard. I'm owner and developer of the project. I have some stuff I'm gonna pass out if that's okay. Papers are gonna be falling here. Hang on a second. Okay, Chair, through you, first to address how a park exists, or excuse me, how a home exists in the park. This home was built in 1890, so it actually predates Holiday Park. Why city leadership over the years hasn't attempted to purchase it, I have no idea. This property was never for sale. Sam Galliotis used to own it, use it as campaign headquarters. He ran unsuccessfully for a governor for the 2020 campaign. I figured he had his hands full opening up the Metropolitan downtown. So I approached him and worked on him for several months to try and be able to purchase this property. I've always envisioned this as a development potential. End of 2019, I approached the Parks and Rec director, Jason Sanchez, along with Mr. Bloom. at the time to see if Parks and Rec had a use for the parking lot that's immediately south of the property. I'm paraphrasing here. I can't speak for Mr. Sanchez, but I believe he said it was somewhat of a nuisance and a maintenance issue. Parks didn't really see a need for the property, so subsequently it went through the governing body at that time to be, to be declared as surplus. I was the only bidder of the property. I successfully won the bid, and as Mr. Bloom deferred, I was ready to close and move forward on some of the plat and zoning actions. However, the title was held up. The city was unsuccessfully unable to deliver clear title on the property without going through Land Use Water Conservation District, which I'm totally empathetic to because I don't want to put the city in a position where future funding on these types of projects is affected. The map that you have before you is to scale. The red dots are accesses that are going to be deleted. Although there's a parking lot there, it can't be used as a parking lot with any future use because those accesses just are not safe. The dot to the left is too close to the Lincoln Way Maury intersection. So anyone heading inbound and outbound of the parking lot would not give southbound Maury traffic sufficient time to react. The dot that's near the red dot to the far right, that Lincoln Way access is going to be deleted. It does meet YDOT requirements. It's just outside of the spacing. However, the geometry is not safe. As you know, with our experience together, I do tend to push the limits, but those accesses just simply are not going to work. In exchange for that, we do have the orange dots, which are proposed new accesses for the project. I have preliminary approval from the engineering department for the orange dot on Maury Avenue, but that is contingent on deleting the accesses that I've mentioned previously. The orange dot to the left of the map is roughly 8 to 9 feet taller, 8 to 9 feet higher in elevation than the other orange dot. That's how I'm able to accomplish drive under parking with the building. That's not the most professional map, but everything is to scale. So if you take the smaller square that I provided to you, you can align the building two different ways. The parking lot does have to be accessed by that orange dot. The parking lot will be at least 23 spaces of surface parking, in addition to an equal, if not greater amount of spaces beneath. So there's 46 spaces above and below total included for that parking lot. The building is also proposed to be drive under parking, and it's also the exact same dimension of what the parking lot is. So I'm proposing at least 20 underground spaces for the building itself. Whether requirements are there or not, it's critical that this building has at least one permanent private underground parking space for every residential tenant above. So my intent is to deliver at least 40. This is not an arbitrary idea. We've worked with civil engineers, Parks and Rec to make sure that this is feasible. So as it stands and as it's presented, there's at least 66 parking spaces just with that square. That's not including any additional parking I can get on the trapezoidal piece. That's just to the right, or rather to the east of the property. To Mr. Seagray's point, residential units that are not for sale, that are for rent, are 1.5 spaces per dwelling. So there's going to be a total of 60 spaces that are ultimately going to be required for that. Commercial parking is 1 space per 300 square feet. For offices, there's going to be roughly 6,000 square feet of office space in this project. 6,000 divided by 300 is 20 spaces. And I'm going to be meeting that with the surface parking lot. I do envision this being a combination of office and a restaurant. I've lived at the house for several years. I think a cafe would be great overlooking the lake, and strategically that's going to be limited to 2,000 square feet or less. That's going to require 10 parking spaces for the square footage and estimating 8 employees on site, which may be on the high side, but nonetheless, it's best to be conservative. We're looking at 14 spaces. So a total of 34 spaces for the commercial element, 60 spaces for the residential element. However, if I have a 6,000 square foot office, it's likely that that's going to be closing at 5 p.m. Most residents are likely going to be coming home at 5:30 p.m. So there is a shared parking provision within the UDC. I'm going to try and meet parking the best I can. I'm willing to have that written as an amendment in the contract, so it's not just inflicted upon by the governing body, but I'm held to that standard, or any future owner is held to that standard. If I'm not able to deliver this project that conforms, the city does have first right of refusal to purchase this land back as well. So I believe we have a win-win here. As Connor mentioned earlier, the park was just arbitrarily thrown in. There's lots of existing right-of-way. There's lots of BOPU facilities that are through the park with no easements. As a part of the plating action, that'll follow the zone change if it's successful. A lot of that's going to be cleaned up. So we'll have vacated right of way all throughout the park. Official boundaries will be established for Holiday Park. Even some of the right of way along the east side of the park hasn't been platted properly with correct easements. So as a result of this, that's all going to be cleaned up, and that's a stipulation that's in the contract as well. So I know the idea seems ambitious. I've had a 5-year head start on it. It's hard to condense it into a 5 or 10-minute presentation. But I hope we'll get the benefit of the doubt with projects that I've proposed previously to the governing body. And I would welcome you in your free time to reach out to engineering or Parks and Rec to see what their opinion of the matter is. I've tried to work with them very, very closely to make sure that this is mutually beneficial for everybody. That being said, I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from committee? Mr. Seagrave?
Through you, will the 1890 home stay or will it have to go?
So the 1890 home is going to go, but it's not going to be demolished. I've been through several planning and development actions, trying to find lots for the home to move, between covenants, streetlights, power lines. It's very, very difficult. I do have a friend of mine who I sold a property at 1804 Rollins. That's basically fronting 18th Street, just east side of the park. I've also represented him in an administrative plat action, which is on the verge of approval. So the home is going to be saved. The home is going to be moved by Dan, the house mover. He's moved, I believe I don't know what the name was for, maybe the sisters' homes or something by the hospital. He's moved those in addition to a historic gazebo that was placed in Holiday Park, I believe within the last 5 or 6 years. The house the house looks rough on the outside, but it's great on the inside. The reluctance to do any exterior improvements have been just for that reason. I didn't know what the future of the home was going to be. But that house will be saved. And from a heart posture position, I'm very proud of that as well, because I did live there for several years. So it's boarded up now and looks rough due to transient issues. It's been very unfortunate, but it's just what I had to do to keep it secure.
Mr. Seagrave, any further questions?
What happens if we don't approve the UU? I'm not a UU fan. And it sounds like you get the parking under control, but who knows what happens if you sell or trade or whatever the property at some point. So what happens to your project without the UU?
So I'm likely not going to proceed with the parking lot. The reason being is if I'm limited to 3 stories, it's just not feasible to purchase the parking lot and then subsequently go through the remediation that the parking lot's going to need. I'm envisioning basically excavating that to Holiday Park grade. I'd have to install a new retaining wall off the top of my head. That's roughly 250 linear feet. I'm not just going to do a crummy block wall. I mean, keep in mind, this project has a symbiotic relationship with the park. So whatever I do has to be, in my opinion, to a bit higher standard. I think it's more a UDC issue than it is of this project. There's only 2 zones I could pursue that would allow a building taller than 3 stories used by right. That's Central Business District that has no design requirements. So I think that creates an even worse perception than MUB with UU overlay. I do agree that the UU overlay with the parking issue could be a concern. I have reached out to the city attorney to see if we can modify the contract to include that. And I could not trade or sell this property without giving the city the first right of refusal. I believe we have built-in insurance in the deal. I can't express it enough. My intent is to make this project work the best I can. Even if I didn't have parking requirements and it wasn't put in writing, I made a promise to Jason Sanchez that this project would self-contain. I don't want tenants, people visiting the building to eat, parking all over the park, unless it's organic. I do expect in the summertime, they'll be in the park anyway and likely come over for a bite to eat. UU, without the UU overlay, I believe really hinders the potential of this project. There's already a 5-story building that exists east of the park in Park Lane condominiums. So I'm certainly not the first in that area to try and do something with as ambitious as the height. And I would prefer UU overlay to ultimately give me the ability to design a project that's going to work best. I anticipate 40 units, but if we get into it and we can't make it work, we're going to reduce the density. But it certainly won't be at the expense of any design requirements or parking requirements by the city.
Any follow-up, Mr. Seagrave?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Rennie?
Mr. Chairman, that answered my question on the height requirement. I couldn't remember what you're limited to. And The other question that UU changes is the required setbacks. So what is that, what are the, if it's just zoned essentially business to kind of fix the neighborhood, what is that? What is the difference in setbacks from that as the planning commission recommended opposed to what UU would allow you?
So we actually didn't discuss the setback issue with planning commission. Hindsight's 2020. I really should have brought that up. It's actually self-inflicted by my guaranteed delivered parking. That's why I gave you that square. That square is only going to fit in one area, and that's up against the left side of the map. And if you look at the property lines, no matter what, I'm going to encroach rear side setbacks. Now, if I was in between buildings or up against park facilities, I would think this would be a much greater issue, but I'm essentially up against green space. With the MUB zone only, even that 5-foot setback makes two parking lots adjacent to each other very, very difficult. The UDC stipulate, and I have this paperwork here, but I don't want to overwhelm you. If it's a perpendicular parking lot, so a single aisle parking lanes opposite of each other, that needs a minimum of a 63-foot width. That doesn't include bumper overhangs. So if I have drive under parking with foundations, that's going to encroach on that a little bit. So even a 5-foot setback, 5-foot side setback requirement reduces that 132 width down to 126. And when you factor in the building footprint, that's not enough room. The rear setback issue perhaps could be adjusted by the building, but again, I'm trying to maximize parking. So if you give me a 15-foot setback requirement, I'm going to lose 8 parking spaces. So I get that it appears overzealous. I tried to buy a little more land, so it wasn't as tight. It's impossible. I guess impossible is not the best word, but I don't think any of us wants to wait another 4 years to get it through land water conservation. I believe everyone is agreeable to the idea of giving it more buffer, but the reality is we barely survived this process with state parks. And I do agree with the planning director that we should keep it as it currently stands. So it's directly correlated with my insistence on providing as much parking as I can with the project.
Okay. And then my last question, I was aware of the apartment building of similar height on the east side of the park. I assume, I mean, that's been there for decades. I assume that must have gone through Board of Adjustments because we didn't have a UU zone back then. So why not, instead of, again, knowing that UU's been somewhat controversial, why not just have Board of Adjustments look at this?
So a few reasons. If I applied for the Board of Adjustment 4 years ago, I would have had to see it every year until we close this project. Board of Adjustment approvals expire after a year. If it was just one item and I was closer to construction, I would consider it, but I'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment asking for conditional use for a multi-story building above 3 stories and likely a 0-foot side setback and a very minimal setback in the rear. I'm certainly not afraid of the process. I've been through it 5 times. But the nature of this, and I just believe that I'm expressing my intent with the governing body. I've got 8 hearings already related to the zone change before you and the plat action that's going to follow very shortly. To add a 9th hearing with 3 agenda items, all or nothing in perpetuity every year, I believe it is an unnecessary hurdle. I also believe that we've met the intent of public notice. I've had to mail the same letter to property owners within 300 feet as I would with the Board of Adjustment. And furthermore, I think precedent is somewhat set with the Park Lane condominiums building that's already on the east side of the park. This, although it's going to be 6 stories, I'm not going to have 12 to 15-foot ceilings in the units. So you're likely looking at a very similar project. I've also been at recent meetings to speak in favor of similar height projects. So probably be a little salty, I guess, for lack of a better term, that those have passed and that I'm continuing to be put through hurdles on the matter. But the biggest issue is the procedural issue of those requirements to expire after a year. That's actually happened to me on moving the Holiday Park house. I had a variance and conditional use in place to move the house, only to find that it expired after a year. And in lieu of pursuing it again, I just decided to plat the property.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just have one quick question. Looking at
Sure.
the outline of the property, how's the building going to be situated?
So I only have 2 options. So we'll consider the frontage of the building the more narrower option. The building can either front Lincoln Way or front Maury. But I only have one access off of Maury, so the parking lot has to utilize that somehow. That's why I wanted to present this map to you. Again, it's not the greatest, but it is to scale. The building kind of has to only sit two ways. I'd probably prefer it to have the shorter dimension front Lincoln Way. There's just a little bit more buffer there. I can have more landscape. I have not discussed this with YDOT, but perhaps they're open to a little bit more land to give some relief to that Maury turn lane because it's very, very tight at the present moment. So my preference would be to have basically the length of the parking lot go up against Maury and the narrower portion of the building along Lincoln Way. I think that would be best.
And would this portion of the lot, would that be utilized as part of your building?
No, it can't. There's actually a Bopu water main. Brad and Frank can speak to this if they'd like. But that water main is going to require at least a 30-foot easement, so I can't build on 15 feet either side. It's probably good practice as well to keep the building a little bit further than that, so I can have parking above it, but no parking structures. So I can't have any two-story parking garage, whatnot. And it's also a very tough geometry. If I had that same square footage and it was square, I could probably get another 15 parking spaces. But I believe I can get about 16 to 20 spaces out of that trapezoidal shape. And as it comes to a point closer to the east side, we're envisioning that more landscape and drainage retention if necessary.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, you're welcome.
Any further questions from committee for developer? Mr.
Mr.
Labor.
Chairman, this is a very unique and I think important project. I think that parking lot has been a problem for a long time and certainly didn't contribute to the park itself. How it ever got there in the first place is an interesting question. Of course, the house. But Mr. Swain, in your presentation here, it's, and I certainly appreciate the information that's here. It's difficult for me to conceive of some of the spatial considerations that you mentioned. So perhaps I can visit with the planning office and with you regarding the specifics of this before we proceed much further, because I believe that 15th Street connection and that whole redevelopment along Nation Way is, Lincoln Way is important, but this just seems like an awful lot. So I'm in favor of this ordinance without the UU. And I look forward to learning more about how this all can come together. And obviously it's very ambitious and has a lot of considerations that might be beneficial or could be beneficial, but I'd just like to know more before we proceed much further. So you'd be glad to visit with me, correct?
Of course.
Well, we'll see if we couldn't arrange that in the next few days.
Now, if I may express, by approving zoning, you're not approving the project as it's presented. It's just giving me the ability to push that project further through both the planning and development staff, Parks and Recreation, and then the engineering development as well. This project absolutely has to have a site plan. So it could be that I'm overzealous in the presentation. I'll tell you, I didn't come up with this on my own. I've worked with Darcy Hendon on this project for years. And prior to purchasing the parking lot, I had a responsibility to myself and the city that I was able to deliver on some of these items. So I'm absolutely willing to meet with you. My preference would be, it's probably not surprising to still have it proceed with MUB with a UU overlay. Hopefully in the interim, the city attorney and I can work on some type of MOU or amendment to the contract to guarantee parking as well, because that's very, very important to me. I would like the parking concerns removed because I intend to meet this just as any other developer would on a project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Secret.
Two quick things. I believe I also read that you're willing to put into an agreement that this would start within a year. Is that correct?
I'm not. I mean, when I first had this under contract, rates were half of what they were now and building costs were 2/3. I do intend to proceed. I'm also, being totally honest with the governing body. I'm going to work with the URA to see if this is a potential candidate for blight that might help ease up, some of the costs and, push the project along. But my intent is to move it forward just as quickly as I can. But just the civil engineering alone, the architectural design is going to take several months. I don't want this to sit for 5 years. If I could wave my magic wand, we would start moving dirt within 2 years. But even just the process in my hands before it gets to the city is a very long time. There's going to be a lot of back and forth between Parks and Rec and engineering to make sure that it's a holistic solution. There's certainly a way to rush it, but I'm very sensitive to this project. Working with the park, there may be additional pedestrian connections that I can provide. As a result, I may allow input on design of the retaining wall and whatnot, because the better this building is, I think the better it is for people who are attending the park.
Thank you.
Any further questions from committee for the developer? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Public comment? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion initially to approve with the designation of MUB.
Okay.
So,
So a motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie.
I wanted to have this discussion in two parts, is why I'm doing it this way. I want to amend my original motion to add the UU overlay.
So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Oh, come on, let me talk about it. Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to add a UU overlay. Dr.
Mr.
Rennie.
Chairman. The reason I think UU is warranted in this case are a couple of points. It sounds like the developer has addressed the parking issues that will concern most of us. Normally, I don't like the restriction of setbacks because the UU overlay essentially gets rid of all setbacks. However, when the property or the development is adjacent to the park, it really doesn't matter what the setbacks are because there's not going to be anything built right next to it. And then lastly, the height restriction, the height of 6 stories doesn't bother me. As it was pointed out, and I remembered immediately, is that there's already a 5-story apartment complex on the northeast side of the park. So this is just kind of a bookend for it. So really the reason for the UU is to change the set, not to mess with the parking or allow him to have less parking. The purpose of the UU is to remove the setbacks, which are kind of irrelevant in this case, and to allow him to have 6 stories, which makes the project affordable and probably will help it go. So that's my rationale for supporting the UU. I would hope that my colleagues would agree to that. But again, I wanted to break it up into 2 parts so we could discuss it that way.
Further comments?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
there was mention earlier of an agreement, possibly working with the city attorney. I would feel better about the UU if I knew there was going to be an agreement solidifying the parking. I'm just very conscious of parking. The decisions we make on parking today will affect this property for the rest of its life, however many hundreds of years that might be. So is that the understanding I have, is that there would be an agreement on parking?
We'll defer that to the city attorney.
Stephanie Boster, Cheyenne's city attorney, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Seagrave. I could do a contract mod. I cannot approve anything as the city attorney. It would need to go through the governing body.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Seagrave.
this comes back before us again, one more time, correct?
2 more times actually to council and then
Once to us.
once to
One
us.
time,
Yes.
okay. I'm going to support the UU today, but I would hope that we get some kind of an agreement together before the next visit and just solidify that. I'll feel a lot better if we can have that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further comment from committee on the substitution?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we're back to the main motion.
You didn't ask for a post.
Oh, I'm sorry, opposed.
No.
Okay. We've been so unified lately. Okay. So, with Mr. Laborn as a no, now we're back on the main motion. Any further questions or comments from committee? Hearing that all those in favor of the main motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed?
No.
Okay. Last item, or next item.
Number 26, resolution certifying planning commission's action amending the future land use maps of Plan Cheyenne, changing the land use category from open space and parks to mixed use commercial for property generally located northeast of the intersection of Maury Avenue and East Lincoln Way.
Okay, staff report, please.
All right, again, Conroe Planning and Development Department should be the last time today. So before you is a proposed amendment to our future land use map in Plan Cheyenne. So this does coincide with the previous zone change. The current future land use map designation for this area, including the house and the parking lot, it's all park and open space. So this does need to be basically changed to match what our proposed zoning is from the previous ordinance. This is a resolution, so this would end up being approved at next council, so it would be prior to that zone change actually going through. So with this future land use map designation, the proposed designation would go to mixed use commercial, which is just south of Lincoln Way on the map. You can see it in kind of that pinkish area, so it would be a future land use designation that's in the area. And then this designation also does support the previous zone change to mixed use business. This will be going to county commissioners this afternoon for comment only because this is fully within city limits. Generally, when we go to county commissioners with things like this, there's usually no comments because it's fully within city limits. But Plan Cheyenne does require us to do that. Planning Commission did hear this item at their meeting and did recommend approval. Staff also recommends approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie?
Plan Cheyenne is kind of tangential, but what's the criteria that this has to go to the commissioners?
So, Chair through you, so within Plan Cheyenne, because it's a joint future land use document for both county and city, there is a provision in there that if we are changing a designation anywhere within that boundary, it goes to that whichever jurisdiction is actually overseeing it for approval of the amendment, but it has to go to the other jurisdiction for comment only.
So do all of our zone changes go to the commission?
Mr. Chair, through you, just future land use map amendments.
Okay.
So zone changes, so our previous item does not, it's just when we're amending the future land use map.
Next. So do we get to, theirs don't come to us, do they? I don't remember one.
Mr. Chair, through you, to our knowledge, there hasn't been any that they've amended out in the county.
All right. Like I said, it was kind of tangential, but thank you for the explanation. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions from committee? Okay, thank you. Any public comment?
Chair, members of the committee, Brandon Swain, 2856 Deming Boulevard, developer of the project. To Councilman Seagrave, I agree. I think we'd all feel better if we had an agreement. This is more of a procedural question here at the committee meeting, just so we're all on the same page. But if the city attorney and I are able to arrive at a contract modification, I'm just curious what the process is to move that through the governing body. As it currently stands, I'm on pace to have final and third reading on these two matters. Are there three readings for land use map amendment? Okay, so the third reading for the zone amendment will be December 9th. I just wanted to make sure that if we do arrive at an understanding for parking, that we can do the approvals at the same time, or if a contract modification moving through the governing body would add more time to this motion.
Stephanie Boster, Cheyenne City Attorney. To clarify, it'd take 3 weeks to get this contract through. If I'm able to put it together by the city council agenda deadline, which is tomorrow at noon.
So if we were to make an amendment that included that, would that speed the process up or?
Mr. Chairman, no, it would not. We would need to modify the contract itself, and we wouldn't be able to modify a resolution to achieve that effect. I don't believe, but I'm meeting with the planning department later this afternoon to discuss. So that's subject to clarification there.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie?
it appears to me that that might be a necessity in order to get the required votes to approve this, so it, you know, Mr. Swain, you may not like it, but if we have to postpone till we get the MOU completed and see it, this project's taken 5 years. What another 2 weeks may not make that much difference.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Seagrave?
it doesn't necessarily have to be a contract mod, just some way, some process, something to make sure that we have the parking, however you can put it together. It's matter to me.
Chair, members of committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. Just wanted to note that we should keep the parking requirements a little bit separate from the zoning because it could have the perception of contract zoning. We will go ahead and discuss a path forward for modification of that purchase agreement. As noted, the purchase agreement was a unique one that was put together by the city, one of the first of its kind. It is one that set certain expectations, minimum number of units, minimum number of floors, mixed use, zone change, land use. We can evaluate whether we can squeeze in parking requirements as well. And we would like to bring that forward as an independent item. So it would try to parallel this process.
Mr. Chair. As long as I know that's in the works, I don't want to hold this up, even if it takes an extra hearing on our part. So I don't want to make it contingent on this if I know we're in the works and everybody agrees to it. So.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And Chair, if I may add, I will go ahead and get a copy of those documents out to members of the committee so you all will see what happened. I do stand corrected that this process, the talk started in 2019. It was July of 2020 is when the surplus designation was made. And then the authorization for the purchase and sale agreement was approved in February of 2021.
Thank you. Any further public comment?
Chair, through you to the members of the committee, we're gonna do whatever we can to meet the intent. I don't know if it's within the governing body's purview to add, parking condition pursuant to 6.2 of the UDC. I'm amenable to that as well. I do appreciate Mr. Seagrave's comment about not holding it up, although I'm also empathetic to Dr. Rennie's comments that I've waited this long, what's a little bit longer. However, you are going to see a plat action following this. Typically, just platting 2 lots together, 2 lots separately is an administrative plat process. I'm not able to do that in this case due to the amount of right of way that has to be vacated. I'm not anticipating this whatsoever. I'm just empowering the governing body that if I did not follow through on my parking commitment, you'll see the plat action before you probably mid-January, and you'll have an opportunity to punish me accordingly.
Okay. Any further questions from committee for the developer? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so may I have a motion? Oh, wait, we got public comment. Public comment.
Move to adopt.
Okay, move to adopt. Do I have a second? Motion is second. Any comments or questions from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Okay, next item.
Number 27, resolution, directing city staff to evaluate and determine an effective drainage plan for the intersection of Bevan Street and Wills Road and the adjacent areas.
Do I have a staff report?
Yeah, it's me this time. Richard Johnson, 612 McGovern Avenue. As you can see in the resolution, this is pretty standard in regards to the request for the city to look into this. I would ask you to look into the whereas in the condition of drainage issues surrounding the intersection of Bevan Street and Wells Road. On November 8th of 2023, the city of Cheyenne executed a professional services agreement with the Ardura Group Incorporated for a drainage improvement feasibility investigation. From my understanding, after speaking with engineering on this, really the only thing that we did was actually we kind of cut a little bit of a swath across the intersection and then did a kind of an entrenching with street and alley to the north and on the heading north on the east side of the street, hoping that would alleviate. But with this intersection and with it being a dry summer, even though they thought it might have been success, I did bring one of the residents that lives right on that intersection, and she's gonna actually carry this on for me, and she has photos of what this actually looks like. And so, Mrs. Binger, if you'd like to present yourself.
Hi, my name is Shelley Binger. I did bring one packet of some photographs. Make them as quick as I can. I live at 3613 Bevins, and I also own a second property on Bevan Streets at 3412. We've owned our 3613 Bevins address since 1982 for 42 years. We're not new to the neighborhood or the drainage issues. Bevan Street is part of the Hillside subdivision, and a good portion of the area has curb and gutter, but no underground drainage. Curb and gutter was done in the early 1980s approximately. Our property is on the southeast corner at the intersection of Bevan Street and Wills Road, and the northern arm of Wills Road is unpaved with no curb or gutter work. For decades, all stormwater, snow melt, and any other water drainage has pooled in the intersection of Bevans and Wills. It stays until it evaporates, which can lead to weeks or even months of standing water, or in the winter months, thick ice ruts with traffic to drive through. With the winter weather, the west and east sections of the intersection freeze and thaw repeatedly, causing the deep ice ruts. Those ruts have caused more than one motorist to sustain enough vehicle damage that required towing away from the intersection with law enforcement assistance as well. A few times a winter, we call the city and report the ice. The city then sends a crew and some heavy equipment to scrape it up and haul it away. When temperatures come above freezing, standing water fills the ice ruts, which camouflages them and causes damage to suspecting motorists. Photos 1 through 4 show the long-term standing water and the size of the puddle. In addition to vehicular damage, the pavement in the intersection requires city attention at a minimum once a year, with old pavement patches failing because of the persistent standing water seeping under them, causing them to crumble and fail. Photos 5 and 6 show the multiple pavement patches, including around the manhole cover. There are potholes there today that need attention. Earlier this year, the city did come, as Mr. Johnson mentioned, and worked on the east side of Wills Street. They cleared a ditch which diverted the water on the east side of Bevan Street all the way down to Wills. The water crosses Wills midway, causing a diagonal rut before the water then will divert east and go down Rollins Street, often flooding the northeast lot, which currently just houses a modular home on it. The efforts that the city put forth have relieved water standing on the east side of the Bevans-Will intersection problem, but the west side of the intersection still holds water till it evaporates. And we still have a lack of drainage for the entire area. Photo number 7 shows poorly the diagonal washout and the direction that the water now goes. So we would really, in our neighborhood, hope that you would consider some sort of drainage answers.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from committee? Yes. Questions from committee? Okay. Any further staff report?
It's the bottom one there. Yeah. So just, good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Public Service Committee, Tom Cobb, City Engineer. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on this. This has been an issue for a long time, which is why I put an RFP together to get this at least analyzed. So what Mr. Johnson had stated is true, and Public Works did go out and do what I would consider phase one of this. There were 5 alternatives developed, and they range in cost from about 90,000 to about 1.2 million. This isn't an easy fix by any means, and the intention of stage one was to simply alleviate some of the pressure and inconvenience that's been caused to the residents in the area, and then prevent flooding from occurring at least in the times of higher event storms. We haven't been able to properly evaluate what Public Works has done at this point, again, as indicated, because the weather was a little drier this summer. I'm going to take and analyze it through the winter and see what kind of issues that we have, and then try to implement as we have funding available to look at further. That is the wrong one, Jennifer, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it moved itself on its own. If you go down to the map, it kind of shows the area in question. That's the existing condition as described by the resident. Again, Wills and Bevins is to the bottom left. You can see the pictures that were developed there with the ponding that occurs mostly on the east side, which is why we again focused on the east to get that to drain out of there. And then the issues related downstream. The points that can be discussed with you right now are that some of this runs through private property, which is a completely independent issue downstream. So if I just open this thing up completely, I'm going to cause what Mr. Johnson used to say is unintended consequences. So this has to be properly done in stages in order for me to actually fix the issue, which is why the ultimate fix is so expensive. This is a problem that I've inherited, and obviously trying to address it. And if you have any particular questions, I'd love to answer them, but at least wanted to give you at least a higher level idea of what we're really dealing with.
Any questions, committee? Mr. Seagrave.
Mr. Chair. Director Cobb, the resolution is asking, it says resolved, is hereby requested to update the governing body on your report, which is doable. Evaluate and determine an effective drainage plan. Those are the 2 things they're asking you to do. Are those feasible? It sounds like you're already in the mix.
Sir, through Chair, through you to Councilman Seagrave. Yeah, I think that it's basically, I just need to formalize a memo just to really document that, but everything's there already. So I've already completed the work, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rennie.
Through you to Engineer Cobb, what then, one of the whereases, what did the Ardura Group do for us? Was that just phase one?
Chairman, through you to Dr. Rennie. Dr. Rennie, they did 5 alternatives for me to decide which way would be the most cost effective to go. So they made a recommendation on that, so it's laid out. But I think from my standpoint, I never actually decided which way we were going to go other than phase one, which was to get the immediate need implemented because there was no cost other than our own forces to do that work. Anything after that is now going to cost us money that I don't have.
Okay, and so to follow up, Mr. Chairman, so essentially the next step is for you to evaluate their alternatives, and if we adopt this, then present what you think is the best alternative and cost to us. That's how I understand it.
Chairman, through you, yes, Dr. Rennie, that's it. I'll put it in the memo and memorialize it to you.
Okay, and at some point, I guess my just thoughts on it, Mr. Chairman, are that, I mean, when you look and if Public Works has to be out there all the time working on it, at some point, it seems like in the very long run, maybe it would make sense to us to just fix it. So we're not having to send somebody out to deal with it all the time. So thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Comments or questions? Okay. Public opinion or public hearing? Public. What am I looking? Public comment, yes. Further public comment. Okay, hearing none, I have a motion.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Let's have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Seagrave.
Dr. Rainey just mentioned, this may or may not be if we ever pass it. Drainage utility, this might be considered part of it, or it might not. I don't know, but it's an option.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from committee? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Okay. Being as there's no further business in front of the Public Services Committee, we are adjourned. I thought we were